The pen was already in his hand. Marcus Hale had held a lot of things in his 43 years on this earth. He had held trophies, handshakes with presidents, and the cold steering wheel of his first car, a rusted thing he bought with money. He earned washing dishes at 16. But nothing, not one single thing, had ever felt as heavy as this pen. Around him, the Celestine restaurant hummed like a living creature. 32 floors above the city, it floated in glass and golden light, the kind of place where the tablecloths cost more than some people's rent. Outside the tall windows, the city sparkled like it was showing off. Inside, everything was quiet in that expensive way, the kind of quiet that only money can buy. There were 4 people at the table. Marcus sat at the head, his dark suit pressed perfectly, his face calm in a way that men practice when they don't want anyone to see them thinking. To his left sat Dmitri Volkov, his translator for the evening, a tall man with silver hair and a smile that arrived a half-second too fast, like he had rehearsed it. Across the table sat 2 men from the Kessler Group, a European investment firm that had been chasing a partnership with Marcus's company for almost 2 years. They wore matching navy suits and matching patient expressions. The contract sat in the middle of the table like a sleeping thing. 47 pages. Translated from German into English by Dmitri himself. It had taken 3 weeks to reach this moment. And now Dmitri was leaning slightly forward, his voice smooth as poured cream. "Mr. Hale," he said, "the Kessler representatives are very pleased. They say this is a historic moment, a bridge between 2 great visions." He smiled again. "They ask only that we not delay further. Their flight leaves at midnight." Marcus looked at the page in front of him. The final page. Signature line. Date. One stroke of a pen and $400 million would begin moving like a river toward a new future. He almost signed. He was a fraction of a second away. His wrist was already tilting when he heard it. A voice. Soft. Close to his ear. So quiet it was almost nothing. "Your translator's lying." Marcus went still. He turned slowly, the way you turn when you're not sure if you really heard what you think you heard. And there she was, a young woman in the restaurant's black uniform, a small notepad in her hand, standing just behind his left shoulder. She looked maybe 25. Her skin was deep brown, her eyes serious and steady, and she was looking at him with a particular expression of someone who has already decided to do something frightening and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. For one long second, nobody moved. Then Dmitri laughed. It was a short laugh, polished and dismissive, the kind that is designed to make the person being laughed at feel small. "Mr. Hale, I apologize," he said, glancing at the waitress with eyes that had gone very flat and very still. "The staff here are sometimes overfamiliar." The 2 Kessler men shifted in their seats. Marcus did not look away from the waitress. "What did you say?" he asked her quietly. She did not flinch. "I said your translator's lying, sir." Her voice was calm and even, like someone reading the weather. "Not mistranslating. Lying. There's a difference." Dmitri's smile stayed on his face, but something behind it changed. "This is highly inappropriate," he said, his voice dropping half a degree in temperature. "Mr. Hale, I have translated for diplomats, for heads of state." "I'm not talking to you," Marcus said. The table went silent. Marcus set the pen down. He looked at the young woman fully now, the way he looked at things when he was deciding whether they were real. She held his gaze without blinking. Most people, when Marcus Hale looked at them that way, found something else to stare at. She didn't. "Your name," he said. "Adiz," she said. "Adiz Okafor." "And how do you know he's lying, Adiz?" She glanced once at Dmitri, a quick, careful glance, like checking the distance of something dangerous, and then she looked back at Marcus. "Because I speak German, sir. I have spoken it since I was 9 years old. My father was a trader. He did business with German partners for 15 years. She paused. "And what Mr. Volkov just told you, that they are pleased, that this is historic, that they only want to move quickly." She shook her head slowly. "That is not what they said." One of the Kessler men cleared his throat. The other reached for his water glass. Dmitri stood up, not fully, just enough, like a man deciding whether a situation requires standing or sitting and landing uncomfortably in between. "Mr. Hale," he said, and now the warmth was completely gone from his voice, stripped away like paint in the rain. "I must strongly advise you not to entertain." "Sit down, Dmitri." It was the quietest Marcus had spoken all evening, and it was the most powerful. Dmitri sat. Marcus turned back to Adiz. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant hum, oblivious, waiters moving between tables like ghosts, the city glittering beyond the glass. But at this table, the whole world had narrowed to one question. "Tell me," Marcus said, "exactly what they said." And Adiz took a slow, steady breath. The breath of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally found the right place to set it down, and she began to speak. Across the table, one of the Kessler men began to look, for the first time all evening, genuinely uncomfortable. And Dimitri's hand, resting on the table beside the unsigned contract, curled slowly into a fist. The restaurant kept moving around them. Somewhere behind Adiz, a cork popped from a bottle of champagne. A couple at a window table laughed at something private and soft. A waiter wheeled a dessert cart past with quiet, practiced elegance. The world of the Celestine carried on as though nothing unusual was happening, as though a young waitress was not standing at the most important table in the room, dismantling a 47-page lie one sentence at a time. "They didn't say they were pleased," Adiz began, her voice low enough that only the table could hear. "The older one," she nodded almost imperceptibly toward the Kessler man on the left, the one with silver-rimmed glasses and a careful mouth. He said, and I will translate exactly. "If he signs tonight, we will have everything we need before he reads the full terms." The silence that followed was the kind that is weight. Marcus did not move. His face did not change. But his eyes, dark and sharp and suddenly very awake, slid slowly toward the Kessler man with the silver-rimmed glasses. The man said nothing. He reached for his water glass again, realized it was already in his hand, and set it back down. Dmitri exhaled through his nose. "Mr. Hale, this young woman is." "Dmitri." Marcus's voice was quiet and final, like a door closing. "If you speak again before I ask you to, you will leave this table. Do you understand me?" A muscle moved in Dimitri's jaw. He nodded once, tight and small. Marcus turned back to Adiz. "Go on." She folded her hands in front of her, the small notepad pressed between her palms. She had stopped pretending to be just a waitress now. They both knew what this was. "The second man," she continued, "the younger one on the right, he asked the older one. Quietly, he thought no one could hear, he asked, 'Does the American understand what Clause 9 transfers?' And the older one said, 'No, Volkov has handled it.'" Marcus was still for a moment. Then he looked at the contract. 47 pages. He had read 31 of them personally, across 3 late nights in his home office with cold coffee and a yellow highlighter. He had trusted Dimitri's summaries for the remaining 16. He had trusted the translation. He had trusted the process. He thought about his father. The memory arrived the way those memories always do, not gently, not with warning, but suddenly and fully, like stepping through a door you forgot was there. His father's name was Raymond Hale, and Raymond Hale had been the kind of man who built things with his hands and his word. He had run a small construction firm in Atlanta for 22 years. Good work, honest work. He had employed 31 people at the firm's peak, men who trusted him, families who depended on those paychecks. When Marcus was 17, a developer had approached Raymond with a partnership deal. It had seemed generous. It had seemed clear. Raymond's own accountant had looked it over and said the numbers were fine. What no one caught, what was buried in language so specific and so technical it read like furniture assembly instructions, was a clause that gave the developer controlling interest in Raymond's firm after the second year of partnership. Not partial control, complete control. Raymond Hale had signed. By the time Marcus turned 19, the firm had a new name on the door. Raymond spent his final working years doing contract jobs for other people, smaller and smaller jobs, quieter and quieter, until the work dried up like a stream in summer, and he sat on his porch in the evenings watching the neighborhood change around him, a man who had built things all his life and somehow ended up with nothing to show for any of it. Marcus had watched that happen. He had been young enough that it shaped him and old enough that it haunted him. He blinked. The restaurant came back. The table. The unsigned contract. Page 9, he said. Adiz nodded. Clause 9. Marcus looked at his assistant, a young man named Jordan who had been sitting quietly at a small side table nearby. Laptop open, always within reach. Jordan had worked for Marcus for 4 years and had developed a particular skill for reading the room. He was already on his feet. I need an independent translator, Marcus said. German to English. Someone with no connection to this deal, this firm, or anyone at this table. I need them here in 20 minutes. Jordan was already on his phone before Marcus finished the sentence, moving away from the table with quiet urgency. Dmitri made a sound, not quite a word, something between a protest and a sigh, and then remembered he had been told not to speak and pressed his lips together. The Kessler man with the silver glasses leaned forward and said something in German. Adiz translated without being asked. He says there is no time for this. He says the offer expires tonight. She paused. He also says, and here something shifted in her voice, something that was not quite anger but was in the same family. He says that in his experience, men who hesitate at the last moment are men who do not have the courage for real business. Marcus looked at the man directly for a long moment. Tell him, he said to Adiz, that in my experience, men who rush other men into signing things in the dark are men who are afraid of the light. Adiz translated. The Kessler man's expression did not change, exactly, but something moved behind it. Marcus picked up the contract. He turned to page 9. The clause was there. Paragraph 4, subsection C, written in the specific language of people who understand that most readers give up by this point. Even in English, it was dense and deliberate, a labyrinth built from legitimate-sounding words. Marcus read it twice. Then he looked at Dimitri's translated summary of the page, a clean half-paragraph that described the clause as a standard operational integration agreement. He set both documents down side by side. Dimitri, he said, would you like to explain the difference between what you wrote here and what is written here? Dimitri looked at the 2 pages. Something happened to his face, a slow, almost geological shift, the way confidence becomes calculation when it realizes it has nowhere to go. There are nuances in translation, he began, that require. Jordan. Marcus raised his voice just enough to carry across the room. Jordan appeared from a corner, phone in hand. How long? 12 minutes, sir. She's on her way up now. Dimitri went quiet. The younger Kessler man said something to the older one in a low, fast voice. The older one did not respond. He was looking at the table with the expression of a man doing very fast mathematics in his head. Adiz stood where she had been standing the whole time. She had not moved, had not shifted her weight, had not looked for a way out. Marcus glanced at her and found himself thinking about what it had cost her to walk up to this table. She was a waitress in a restaurant full of people who could have her fired with a phone call. She had no power here, not the kind that showed up on paper. And yet she had leaned down and whispered for words into the ear of a stranger, knowing exactly what it might mean for her. Why? Marcus asked her quietly. She understood the question without him having to dress it up. My father, she said simply. He signed something he didn't understand, a shipping contract, back in Lagos when I was 12. She looked at her hand for a moment, then back up. He lost 3 years of earnings. We lost our house. She said it plainly, without drama. The way people describe wounds that are old enough to have stopped hurting the way they used to. I watched him try to explain to my mother why the home she had lived in for 11 years no longer belonged to us. She paused. I told myself if I ever had the chance to stop that from happening to someone else, I would take it, even if it cost me. The room was quiet. Then the elevator opened across the restaurant, and a woman in a gray coat stepped out, adjusting her bag on her shoulder, looking around until Jordan waved her over. Marcus looked at Dimitri one final time. Last chance, he said. Tell me what Clause 9 actually says. Dimitri said nothing. Marcus nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something he hoped wasn't true turns out to be exactly as true as he feared. He slid the contract across the table toward the woman in the gray coat as she sat down, already putting on her reading glasses. "Page 9, he said. "Clause 9. Read it to me. All of it." She read, and with every sentence, the room grew a little colder, and the future that had seemed so close and so certain just 20 minutes ago began to reshape itself into something else entirely. Something more careful, more honest, and built on an entirely different kind of foundation. The independent translator's name was Dr. Ingrid Maurer. She had spent 20 years translating legal documents for international courts. She wore no jewelry except a thin gold watch, spoke in precise and unhurried sentences, and had a particular calm of someone who has sat in many rooms where the truth was inconvenient and delivered it anyway. She read Clause 9 aloud. All of it, every word, and by the time she finished, the table felt like a different country. The clause, subsection C, paragraph 4, buried on page 9 like a trap under autumn leaves, did not say Standard Operational Integration Agreement, the way Dimitri's summary had described it. What it actually said, translated cleanly and completely for the first time that evening, was that upon signing, Marcus's company would transfer full intellectual ownership of its 3 core technologies to a Kessler Group subsidiary registered in Luxembourg. Not licensing rights, not shared access, full transfer, permanent, irrevocable, the kind of language that, once signed, cannot be unsigned regardless of how many lawyers you hire or how loud you complain. In plain terms, Marcus would have handed over the beating heart of everything he'd built and received in return a partnership that Kessler could dissolve within 18 months using a separate clause on page 39, a clause Dimitri had summarized as standard exit provisions. Dr. Maurer closed the document and removed her glasses. "That is what it says," she said simply and folded her hands. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then the older Kessler man, the one with silver-rimmed glasses, the one whose careful patience had begun to look, in the new light of the room, more like strategy than courtesy, pushed back from the table and stood. He said something in German. Short, clipped. He says this meeting is over. Adiz translated, still standing where she had been standing for the last 30 minutes. Still steady, still present. "Yes," Marcus said. "It is." He picked up the contract and placed it on top of Dimitri's translation summary. He picked up his pen, the heavy one, the one that had nearly signed away everything, and he set it down on top of the stack. Then he slid the entire pile across the table toward the Kessler men. "Take it with you," he said. The younger Kessler man opened his mouth. The older one touched his arm and shook his head once. They gathered their copies of the document in silence, straightened their matching navy jackets, and walked toward the elevator with the specific dignity of men who are pretending they are not retreating. The elevator doors closed behind them. Dimitri remained seated. He was looking at the tablecloth with the expression of a man reviewing his options and finding them all inadequate. When Marcus turned to him, Dimitri looked up and began arranging words. Something about cultural nuance, about the complexity of legal translation, about intentions being misconstrued. Marcus listened to approximately 15 seconds of this. "Dimitri," he said, "you were paid to translate, not to edit, not to protect anyone's interests but mine. You made a choice tonight. Live with it." He nodded toward Jordan. "Please make sure Mr. Volkov's invoice reflects what he actually delivered." Dimitri stood, straightened his jacket with great precision, and left. And then it was just Marcus, Jordan, Dr. Maurer, and Adiz. And the city sparkling beyond the glass, indifferent and beautiful, 32 floors below. Marcus turned to Dr. Maurer first. He thanked her quietly, and Jordan handled the rest. Then the room was quieter still, and Marcus looked at Adiz, who had begun to collect the glasses from the table with careful, practiced hands, returning, without fuss, to what she had been before all of this. "Adiz," he said. She stopped. "Sit down. Please." She looked at him for a moment, measuring something. Then she pulled out the chair that the older Kessler man had occupied and sat down across from the most powerful man in the room, in the same chair where Careful Danger had been sitting just minutes before, and somehow made it look like it had always been hers. Marcus leaned forward and rested his arms on the table. "Tell me about your family," he said. "Not the summary. the real version. So she told him. Her father, Emmanuel Okafor, had been a trader in Lagos, fabrics, mostly beautiful things, the kind of colors that made people stop on the street. He had worked with European suppliers for years, honest business, good reputation. When she was 12, he had signed a shipping contract with a German logistics firm. His English was good, but his legal English was not. An interpreter provided by the firm had interests aligned with the firm, not with Emmanuel. The contract locked him into payment structures that made profit nearly impossible. 3 years of losses. The house in Surulere. The one Adi's mother had painted the front door of every 2 years, always a slightly different shade of blue, as though the house were a living thing that needed refreshing, gone. They had moved to a smaller place, then a smaller one. Emmanuel never fully recovered, not financially, and not in the quieter ways that matter more. Something in him had dimmed, the way a light dims when the power supply is inconsistent. He still worked. He still smiled. But the particular brightness that Adi's associated with her father, the one that filled a room when he talked about his plans, his fabrics, his future, that brightness never fully came back. Adi's had come to London at 21 on a student visa, studying business administration part-time, working at the Celestine to pay for it, sending money home every month with the discipline of someone who understands that survival is not accidental. She was on her second year of a 3-year program. She had tonight, almost certainly, just lost her job. She said this last part without self-pity, plainly, the way she said most things. The manager saw me approach your table. He will want to speak to me at the end of my shift. She paused. I made a choice. I knew what it might cost. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with the expression of a man recalculating something important. How much is your remaining tuition? He asked. She blinked. That is not. I didn't tell you this for her. I know why you told me, Marcus said. I'm asking a separate question. How much? She told him. He nodded slowly. And your father, is he still trading? Small scale. He never stopped. He just, she searched for the word, contracted, like something that got cold. Marcus sat back in his chair and looked out at the city for a moment. When he turned back, something had settled in his face, a decision made cleanly, without drama. I'm going to speak to the manager before you do, he said. Your job is not in danger. That's the first thing. He paused. The second thing is that my company has a program, or will have one, because I'm building it, for professionals in transition, people who have the skills and the hunger, but not the access. I don't mean charity. I mean structured opportunity. Real work, real pay, real advancement. Merit-based. Transparent. He looked at her steadily. I would like you to be part of building it, because you understand better than most people I've met in expensive suits what it costs when the process is not transparent. Adiz was quiet for a moment. You don't know me, she said carefully. I know what you did tonight, Marcus said. That tells me more than a resume. She looked at him for a long time with those steady, serious eyes. Then she said, I would want it done properly, not as a favor, as a real thing. That's exactly how I want it done, Marcus said. 3 months later, the Hale Group adopted a formal integrity charter. Every major contract independently verified, every translation independently confirmed. Every clause explained in plain language before any signature was requested. It was not a complicated policy. It was, in fact, embarrassingly simple. The kind of thing that makes people say, of course, obviously, and then wonder why it wasn't always the case. Adiz Okafor joined the company's new partnerships and ethics division as a junior consultant. She finished her degree the following year. She was promoted 4 months after that, on merit, exactly as agreed by a panel that did not include Marcus Hale, because he had specifically removed himself from the decision to ensure it was clean. She sent money home every month, as she always had, but the amounts grew. And eventually, not immediately, not in one grand gesture, but steadily, the way real things grow. Her father, Emmanuel, began to speak again about his plans, his fabrics, his future. The brightness did not return all at once, but it returned. Marcus kept the unsigned contract in a drawer in his office, not as a trophy, not as a reminder of cleverness, as a reminder of how close the wrong choice can be, and how thin the line is between a future built on truth and one built on comfortable speed. On the day Adiz received her promotion, she sent him a short message, 4 words, which he read at his desk on a Tuesday morning with cold coffee and a quiet smile. Truth held. Thank you. He typed back 3 words. Thank you first. Because in the end, the most powerful thing in that room on the 32nd floor was not the contract or the $400 million or the men in matching Navy suits. It was a young woman with a notepad in her hands and a father's loss in her heart who looked at a moment that demanded silence and chose, instead, to speak. And that choice, small, quiet, terrifying, echoed forward into every contract signed fairly, every clause read fully, every voice protected regardless of title or status, every future built on the only foundation that actually holds, the truth. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage can arrive quietly and change everything, like and share with someone who needs it here today. And if you want more stories about real strength, hidden wisdom, and the moments that define us, subscribe so you never miss one. The next story is already waiting.